Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another video today. And today I would like to talk about something political, but I promised on my introduction video that I would not talk about politics or any political topics. And so maybe I'm a little bit breaking my own promise or my own rule, so to speak, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily super political or super, controversial in some, maybe, well, it is controversial in many ways, but it's not as controversial as people would lose their minds completely over it. And what is the topic today? The topic is Swedish immigration. And the reason I chose Swedish immigration, well, for one, because I talk a lot about Sweden. That's one of my themes on my YouTube channel. And secondly, I've been reading a lot of articles, or I've been seeing a lot of articles on how Sweden has been discussing immigration politics in their country. And I particularly chose one article called "From Open Hearts to Closed Borders Behind Sweden's Negative Net Immigration Figures" from The Guardian. And it basically talks about how Sweden was very open, how it allowed a lot of refugees and immigrants into their country just 10 to 15 years ago, maybe a little bit more, but in particular when Syria crisis broke out in 2011, 2012, and not just Sweden, but also a lot of people came to Germany and other European countries. Sweden was one of them. And now 10, 12, 14 years later, Sweden is now reversing its policies. So what happened exactly? Why did the moods change? Why did it shift? Why am I reading a lot about Sweden and stuff like that? So, and also recently I was just reading about how Sweden was celebrating negative net immigration figures. So meaning there are more people leaving the country than migrating, the other way around. So those are some of the things I would like to talk about today. And maybe before I get into Sweden and all these topics, I perhaps should clarify what my stance on immigration and Sweden in particular or in general is. And I once talked about culture and immigration and stuff like that in one of my paradox tolerance videos. I published that around in October, something like that. But I didn't go too deep into immigration. But I basically talked about how we should protect our own identity essentially, and we should only tolerate up to a certain degree, and we should not just completely open our borders and just let everyone in and mix in the culture and start destroying it and stuff like that, while also at the same time you should be respectful. You should tolerate to a certain degree different cultures, religions and differences and so on and so forth. I think it's pretty logical and common sense for everyone here. So this is kind of what I was trying to say about the paradox. Now here, my view in particular on immigration is that, first of all, I'm of foreign background, so to speak. I'm not 100% Swiss, I'm 0% Swiss. If we're talking about DNA and stuff like that, I have no Swiss roots. So I understand very well how migrants or immigrants or refugees or just people who move to another country for work purposes come here and they were born here and they grew up here and they feel Swiss, even though they're not by blood Swiss, or they have no relatives here whatsoever. So my view is not like either side, 100% this or 100% that. I'm neither 100% against it nor for it 100%. So my view in particular is that I tend to be a little bit more restrictive in some ways. And when I say restrictive, I mean better control at the border, because first, I don't like to have drugs pouring into the country. I don't like criminals coming into the country. I don't like any cartels, any gangs, any other sorts of criminal activities pouring into the country. So when I say restrictive politics, that's what I mean. Tighter border control, tighter control over who is coming in, what's coming out, things of that sort. And I think most of you would understand that or agree, or if not agree, then share your opinion in the comment section down below as per usual. So that's what I mean. So that's my view on immigration in particular. I'm not necessarily against it nor for it. So what's the reason now why Sweden is starting to reverse some of its immigration policies. Well, the first one is that the crime rates among foreigners have increased, or crime rates in general. Now, again, I'm not trying to be here, against a particular nation, against a particular race whatsoever. I'm just saying how it factually is. And I think at some point, this is maybe also a reason that now Sweden is starting to realize, like, look, things are getting worse. We have to start talking the way it is, and we have to stop always sugarcoating things and stop pretending that everything's fine. And I know that because it's not just in Sweden, but it's also in Switzerland, it's in Germany, it's in France, it's in England, it's almost in every Western country nowadays where there are a lot of refugees, immigrants. There are a lot of problems as well. That's the way it is. So, I'm not going to sit back and apologize and be like, oh no, it's not the way it is. Like, if it is like that, then it is like that. So crime rates among foreigners have increased. And from what I've heard, I've asked quite a few local Swedes, and they were saying that in general, Sweden is safe. Of course, it's not like a third world country there either, but there are some cases, some so-called no-go zones, or some areas where you shouldn't really go. And of course, that's in every country like that. There are areas where you shouldn't really visit or walk past. There are a lot of criminal activities, but in recent times this has increased. So there are more places now where there are more criminal activities in various places. So that's one reason. Then the second one is also cultures are clashing. So I feel like, and of course, because I don't live in Sweden, I haven't traveled to Sweden in recent times. I feel like cultures have begun to clash more, because the more you mix other cultures into one particular country, you start to kind of find difficulties trying to find some kind of middle ground with other people from other countries, from other backgrounds, and that's with everyone. And at some point, Swedish people, especially more like the conservative and the nationalist, eventually start to feel like, okay, we've had enough. We want to actually have Swedish stuff, Swedish tradition, Swedish culture here. We don't want any other type of culture. This is our country, and I guess rightfully so from their point of view. So while the other side, more the left-leaning side, is a bit more open, tolerance type of, they have this kind of tendency to be a little bit softer on the traditionalism, which to some degree I do understand. And once again, we have to consider both sides here. But this is one of many reasons why Sweden has begun to traject its policies now the other way around. The third part that I want to talk about is the fact that Sweden, as far as I remember and know and hear, Sweden is a very tolerant country, and rightfully so. I mean, it's good to be, tolerant, but up to a certain extent. And I feel like Sweden has been a little bit too tolerant in recent times. And again, based on the last video I made last year, tolerance always leads to intolerance in many ways. And when you have cultures coming into your country that are, let's say, a little bit less tolerant, then it becomes a little bit tricky, because they're not going to be that tolerant, but you're going to be somehow tolerant. So how's that going to work out in the end? And you're at home, and they're not really at home, so to speak. They just came into your country. So I feel like at this point, Sweden, or the Swedish population, is starting to wake up and realize the fact that, hey, it's nice to be tolerant. It's nice to be, welcoming and hospitable and all of that, and help people. Perfectly fine. But on the other hand, you only can take just as many hits as you can possibly take, and in the end, at some point, you're just gonna have to fight back and retreat, or push back, and when push comes to shove type of situation, then so I think that's also one particular reason. And lastly, traditionalism, something what I mentioned before. Traditionalism and the loss of values. And I think this applies to many countries in Western Europe in particular. Now, again, it sounds like I'm, completely anti-Western whatsoever. Not really. I think it's just really the tendency right now, because in the last couple of years, if you think about it, a lot of political parties, especially on the right, have gained a lot of popularity and gained a lot of votes. Some even, got the majority of the seats in their parliaments. In Europe, I think like 9 countries have flipped the side now, so there are more conservative countries now, so to speak, and that's a result of everything that has happened in the past like 10-15 years. Was all the immigration, was all the gender policies, all the other policies that were not in alignment with the right-wing sector, so to speak. So, and the pendulum swings, pendulum will always swing back and forth. There is a phase where it will be more left-leaning, then it will be more right-leaning, then it will be again left-leaning. So, it's nothing's temporary, nothing's forever, nothing will, be permanent forever. And at some point it will return back to left-leaning parties and again to right-leaning parties. So, and right now we have just shifted the pendulum more to the right as a consequence or as a reaction to what happened in the last couple of years or in the last decade, so to speak. So, and I guess Sweden is just participating in that as well. And also, I think a lot of liberal parties or left-leaning parties in Sweden have finally caught up to the fact that if they want to win more voters, then they have to actually be a little bit stricter on immigration policies, because they noticed that the Sweden Democrats, the right-leaning party, has started to gain more popularity, I would say. And in order to win votes, you have to cater to people's needs, essentially. And I guess that's why, one of the reasons why now everyone is kind of on board with the SD party. So there's also one particular thing that I read that was interesting, is that Swedish government wants to make the citizenship test much harder, or acquiring the citizenship much more difficult, which I agree, actually. I agree the fact that, here in Switzerland, you have to live here for 10 years, but again, it depends. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 10. So it depends on the situation, who you marry, when you marry, and stuff like that. But in general, I do agree. I mean, you have to earn it. You have to prove that you love your country, that you know the language, you know the culture, you know the values, that you adhere to it. And if you really don't adhere to the values, if you don't want to respect the law and the system of Sweden or of any country, then feel free to leave, basically. And that's completely understandable and rational. So I have to give props to the Swedish government for doing that. And so, yeah, I think that wraps up for today. It was a pretty interesting conversation for sure. I think those kind of subjects is something to be discussed a little bit more often, in my opinion, and especially with various Swedish people that I know or that I've been in touch with. And as always, feel free to leave your remarks, your comments in the section down below. And as always, I'll see you in the next episode or video. Have a nice day.